Hi, Elvis fans. Tom Brown here with another edition of Gates of Graceland. And if you can tell from over my shoulders, yes, I'm sitting in the living room inside Graceland Mansion here in Memphis, Tennessee, at the top of the hill off Elvis Presley Boulevard. And I'm joined by a couple of gentlemen who this is not their first time in this mansion, in this house. A couple of people that Colonel Parker relied heavily on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Colonel. First, we'll talk about where we are with Charles Stone. Welcome.
Yes,
good to see you again.
Thank
Hey,
you,
Greg
Tom.
McDonald.
Good to see you.
Greg,
nice
thank
to
you
see
for
you.
being here.
Thank you for having me.
Here we sit in the living room at Graceland, and I know you guys walked in just a few minutes ago. What are your thoughts? It's quiet here in the house. We're after tours. And it probably was never this quiet when you were here, when Elvis was around.
No, but I mean, how cool is this? It doesn't get any cooler than this anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
But you mentioned about the last time I was here. It was after the show we did in Memphis. I think we did 3 or 4 shows that weekend. But after the last show, Elvis threw a party for the band. And it was raining hard. I mean, pouring rain. So we had the bus. Elvis came on home immediately after the show. We went to the hotel and changed and came afterwards. And from the bus to the door, it was dirt, wet, muddy. And we went in here and went straight back through here over the white shag carpet.
Oh.
And then there was a room to the left. They had all his gold records. That's where the party was. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at everybody's trying to wipe their feet. And Garcia said, "Don't worry about it. He won't have it cleaned. He'll just replace it." That's probably true.
Yeah, probably so.
And looking at it, he did, because it was shag carpet at that time.
Yeah. It's an amazing space. I mean, Greg, for you, coming back in, what are your thoughts being
Well,
here?
it's hard to believe it's been so many years ago. Charles and I were just talking. We've known each other almost 50 years, and this is where it started. I met Charles in Palm Springs at the Colonel's house. And then over the years, I'd come here as a young kid with the Colonel.
Yeah.
And when the Colonel showed up, I think it had a different atmosphere
Oh,
than
for
when
sure.
the guys were here alone. When the Colonel came, it got sort of formal, and
Yeah.
and we were sort of from the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't see all of the fun that was probably had when we weren't here.
Right, right. Greg, tell me about yourself. Tell the fans out there, how did you enter the Elvis world?
I'm a 9-10-year-old kid, and my dad's a preacher, and we used to work with a minister named Oral Roberts. We had a circus tent. Oral Roberts had a circus tent that had 10,000 seats. So I would pass the velvet bag and pick up the collections, and all the kids would have to set the chairs, the 10,000 chairs. And then Brother Roberts would do his. I'm in Palm Springs. I'm 9-10 years old, and I'm changing filters on air conditioners. I was sent up into this nice neighborhood called Las Palmas, and I was just in a hall closet changing filters. That's all I could do. I was just a kid, and I'm up underneath the furnace, and my feet are sticking out in the hall, and I'm got a hip joint toolbox there in the hall, and I'm trying to pick up a screwdriver, and there's this little white poodle dog, and he's trying to eat me up. He's barking, and I'm cursing. And I look down between my feet, and there's a guy talking to me. And I can tell it's Elvis's face. I mean, everybody knew Elvis. And he said, "Boy, come out from under there." He's laughing at me. He says, "What are you doing under there?" And I crawled out, and I said, "Well, I'm trying to change your filters, and your dog's trying to eat me up." And he said, "No, that's not my dog. It belongs to that girl out here by the pool." So we start talking. He says, "What are you doing? You're an air conditioning man?" I said, "No, I can just change filters." But I work for Oral Roberts. When we're not in Palm Springs, I'm one of the preacher kids, and we all work for the church. And he says, "Well, I love Oral Roberts." He says, "You're an Assembly of God boy." And I said, "Yeah, I guess I am." And he says, "I'm an Assembly of God guy, and your dad's a preacher." So we immediately break off into all the preachers he likes, and he likes gospel music, and I'm just a kid. So the phone rings, and he answers the phone, and it's this guy, the Colonel. And I don't know who Colonel Parker is. I know who Elvis was. And he said, "This is the Colonel. He's my manager. He lives over here a couple blocks away." I'm on my bike. He says, you go over, and he wants you to change his filters. He tells me where he lives. So I go over on the bike, and I think the Colonel is like this military guy. He's a colonel. Well, I show up, and there's this regular guy, and I come in, and we talked for a few hours. I changed the filter, and I stayed and worked with him for 27 years.
Wow. Wow. But it all starts with
Elvis.
The white dog and Elvis
Yep.
at that house. But Colonel could read people, though, couldn't he? I mean, even at that age, he was figuring out the kind of person that you were. And, but you were, I'm looking at a kid, 19, this is a go-getter. This is a kid that's out there doing it. And Charles, tell us where you entered the story. Where did you meet Colonel, and how did you get involved in this whole Elvis world?
To make a long story short, they sent me to Alabama to put a show on sale because it was a do-it-yourselfer venue. There was no computers, no box office staff.
Yeah.
I had to hire bank tellers, and I had been in this building with Chicago and Grand Funk and bands like that. So I put it on sale, and I had a phone number to call when I sold out. Mm-hmm. It took 6-8 hours to sell out because it's one ticket at a time.
Yeah.
And so I called this number, and somebody answers. I didn't know who it was. I said, "May I speak to Jerry Weintraub or Tom Hewlett?" "Who's calling?" I said, "Charles Tom." "Well, this is a Colonel." I just locked up. I never expected to be talking to Colonel Parker because he was as famous as Elvis in the entertainment industry.
Sure.
And I just locked up. He said, "Are you in the box office?" I said, "Yes, sir." I immediately started calling him sir out of the respect that he gives. And he said, I want you to open every drawer and look and see if there's any tickets left." I said, "Colonel, I've balanced my money against the manifest." Mr. Stone got my attention real quick. I said, "Yes, sir." So I put the phone down and opened and shut the same door 6 times. "No, sir, there are no tickets left. You've done a great job. Come to California tonight." I said, "Well, I was supposed to go back with the Sinatra show." He said, "Just a moment." So Jerry Weintraub gets on the phone and says, "Come on out to California. I'll send somebody else." So I fly to California, and the next day I sit in the office at MGM Studio all day and nobody talks to me. All day I'm there. Nobody. At least they brought me a ham sandwich for lunch. That night we go to Trader Vic's and have the dinner that I've told about where the Colonel did not order anything. And I'm thinking, am I really witnessing what I'm thinking? And the next day they take me in the Colonel's office and we start booking tours. And I think what you asked about Greg and the Colonel's people, he knows who he could trust. Mm-hmm. One thing about the Colonel's entourage, everybody in there could be totally trusted. And the Colonel just knew. He just knew who he could trust and do things with.
So for the Elvis fans that are watching this Gates episode, what's the biggest misconception, as guys who worked for Colonel, what's the biggest misconception that Elvis fans have about the kind of guy he was, the kind of businessman he was, and the relationship that he had with Elvis?
I'll start that and then let Greg get him. But in Lake Tahoe one day, he gets a call from NBC TV, and they said they had a cancellation at prime time next week, and they needed to run an Elvis movie. What kind of deal we make? So whatever deal the Colonel made with the studios when he made the movies, he negotiated that morning $750,000, one run that week and one rerun. So before Elvis ever woke up, he made $750,000 for something that he did 10 to 15 years ago.
And something that he did 10 to 15 years ago that somehow in the negotiation of making that film, Colonel had the rights. They had to get that cleared through.
I was so puzzled as to why that they didn't call whatever the movie, I don't remember what movie it was, but the Colonel, I said, "Damn, that's a hell of a deal right there that he made." Yeah. So he took good care of Elvis.
Colonel was the kind of person that, and you hear about this in business a lot, and Charles and I were talking earlier, Ted Turner's one of those kind of people. They underestimate a Southerner, they underestimate the intelligence, and usually that works to the advantage of Colonel or a Ted Turner.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he played the part of go ahead and underestimate me.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Treat me like a country boy.
Mm-hmm. For you, talking to the fans and what the fans know about Colonel and what's something you see that they don't understand or realize?
The Colonel's life was dedicated to Elvis. He loved him. Colonel had breakfast meetings at 6:15 every morning. You couldn't be late for the breakfast meeting or you got the bad jobs all day. Mm-hmm. Charles knows you'd get in trouble if you missed the breakfast meeting on the road.
I never missed one because I didn't want to
miss one. Or if you weren't carrying your Snowman's League card too, you got a fine and you were in trouble. I still carry my Snowman's card today.
Tell them what that is. Tell them what the
Snowman's League of America. There's an entertainment business club called the Showman's League of America, which is the International Association of Fairs and Exhibitors. And the Colonel was always on the board of that, and it was all the bookers and the fair guys. Well, the Colonel created the Snowman's League, and the logo was "Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow." So it was really just a club of friends, and the presidents were involved in it. Elvis was the first member, and the Colonel, and that was always a fun thing. It didn't mean anything. What it meant was you can't lie to them, but you can snow them for their own good. That was one of his sayings. But he spent his time every day working on Elvis. Like Charlie said many times, we were around when he took a pass on the Beatles. He didn't take the Beatles in their prime. When Brian Epstein died, the Colonel told those guys directly, and there's somewhere here an email back and forth.
It's a telegram.
Telegram, not an email.
That was email before email. Yeah.
And I was once out at Frank Sinatra's compound with the Colonel, and a famous banker named Al Hart from City National Bank was there, and he wanted the Colonel to go with him to talk to Sinatra. And Sinatra had been retired for a while, and he had a health problem, and he just didn't tell the public. But when he recovered from that health problem, Al Hart had to go tell Sinatra had to go back to work because he was really short of money. But he wanted the Colonel to tell him. He was afraid of it. So Colonel went out, and we were out in Rancho Mirage on Frank Sinatra Boulevard. We sat out by the pool, and the Colonel says, "Al here says you got to go back to work, Frank. You got to go back to work. You're out of money." And Sinatra said, "Well, I'm feeling better." And so the Colonel arranged for Jerry Weintraub to do an event in New York at Madison Square Garden. It was called The Main Event, and that was his comeback. And Sinatra at that meeting says, "Colonel, all this stuff is making me crazy. I hate this business." He says, "You got to manage me now. It's been long enough." And the Colonel says, I can't. I only manage Elvis. He and I are partners. I only manage Elvis." So that was the second giant group. I mean, Sinatra and then, of course, the Beatles. I heard him pass on them. Unbelievable, because they were huge.
Yeah.
Right at that one, Sinatra was making his comeback.
Sinatra's, that kind of entertainer that understands the importance of having that buffer. You want the artist to stay doing what they do best, and you need, and this is a lot of times where I think Colonel gets a lot of the blame. You had to have someone to say no. You had to have, to studios, to business. You had to have a bad guy to take care of that business, to keep that away from the artist. That's a really important part of being.
Somebody has to wear the black hat.
Yeah.
And with Elvis, he would rather make no decision than a bad decision, which I'm sure you've heard that before. So therefore, he had the Colonel make all his decisions for him. One of the things that Colonel gets blamed for a lot is that he wouldn't let him make a serious role in a movie, a dramatic role or whatever. Well, one evening, Colonel and I went to have dinner with Hal Wallace. So as we're having dinner, I'm a kid, and I got a big mouth sometimes. I just asked him, I said, "Mr. Wallace, I can ask you something." I could see Colonel doing stuff over there. But I said, "If the rumor has it that you wouldn't let, or Colonel wouldn't let Elvis do a dramatic role." He said, "That's not true, Charlie." He said, "I can tell you, there's not a studio in the world that would have financed a movie that he didn't sing in." He said, "I'm just telling you flat out, it couldn't have happened." Makes sense. He said, "Why would you take the greatest singer in the world and put him in a movie and not let him sing?"
Yeah.
Makes a little sense that way.
Yeah. And if you look at the numbers, you look at the box office numbers, those movies he made coming out of the Army, he makes the 4 movies before the Army, which are, Loving You and Love Me Tender and Jailhouse Rock and King Creole. Then he goes to the Army, and then he comes back from the Army. And what do you do when you come back? You make GI Blues, because that's, it's a war, singing war guy. You got to do that one. But then those couple he make right after that, Flaming Star and Wild in the Country, those are dramatic. Those are more dramatic films with less music. And those are not successful. And again, just look at the box office numbers. And then the next movie, Blue Hawaii. Boom. Now the die is cast. And you just keep looking at those numbers. If anything, Elvis's film career was a victim of us, because we're the ones that went to those movies. We're the ones that bought those soundtrack
And the ones
albums.
that didn't go to the movies, too.
Yeah, yeah. So it's an interesting story, and I think, like I said, Colonel is one of those characters that swirl around in the world of Elvis that are loved and also blamed, and it just is a giant fog around what really happened, and to have people that were there, I think is really important. To hear it from you, for the Elvis fans to hear it from you guys. And I know walking back in this mansion today, what was it that who was it told you that you would never come back in this house again?
Colonel Parker.
Colonel.
There was issues after Elvis passed.
Yeah.
Colonel and I'd sit in the backyard. Most of Elvis Presley's business was done in the backyard of his house on Vista Vespero, not in Hollywood, or in the steam room at Spa Hotel in Palm Springs, most of the deals. I would sit and hear hundreds of phone calls between Elvis and the Colonel. I'd only hear the Colonel's side of it. And a lot of the movie things. Elvis did want to make other movies. I know, he wanted to go back on the road, too, for those 9 years when the Beatles were out, and the Colonel wouldn't let him play. All of the other music stars from the 50s got reduced down to nightclubs. Fats Domino, Everly Brothers, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis. All those guys were now playing nightclubs, and Elvis was a movie star in Hollywood. So if you notice, it was just a couple of weeks after the Beatles did their press conference and they broke up that Elvis and the Colonel started announcing the comeback special. Mm-hmm. The Colonel knew that the 1968 comeback special was a crucial time for Elvis because the Beatles had just wiped all the American acts out. So that special had to be really good. Well, his version of the special was going to be a Christmas show.
Right.
And I heard him selling it to Singer Sewing Machines, actually financed that show. So the Colonel, to make sure Elvis was successful coming back, he had them, the Singer Sewing Machine Company bought 500,000 pieces of the single to be sold exclusively for an exclusive window at Singer Sewing Machine Companies. You couldn't get it anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So it was destined to be a Christmas special, and there was a little rub between the Colonel and Steve Bender. So as soon as that show ran on NBC, Elvis's comeback show, Elvis had a gold single. Well, 2 weeks later, the deal was that they had to buy another 500,000 pieces, registered, in those days, and then had a platinum album. In 3 weeks, Elvis Presley had a platinum album, and everybody stopped calling it the Singer Special, and they now call it all these years later the Comeback Special.
Right.
Because the Colonel made it a comeback.
Yeah.
He didn't know for sure. He wouldn't let Elvis take that chance.
Yeah.
No way.
There's a part of showbiz today that I really want to get your input in. Colonel was really smart in how Elvis, Elvis didn't do game shows, he didn't do talk shows, he didn't, you paid to see Elvis on screen, and then he would go away, and then you would miss him, and you'd want to see him again. In today's showbiz, in the day of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all this social media where celebrities have instant access to their fans and can share every bit of their private life and public life at all times, what do you think Colonel would have made of all this?
Personally, I don't think it would change any way he did it. I think he would still remain the unknown factor with Elvis, because that's what sold. That's what sold is you don't really know anything about Elvis until you pay to go see him.
Yeah.
There isn't anything else. There's no big Rolling Stone article on him. There's no TV Entertainment Tonight on him. He didn't do that. Right. If you want to see Elvis, you had to go pay.
It's the things we know about the inner workings of Elvis's world are really things we learned after Elvis passed. That we didn't really know anything about. Growing up in Tupelo, I'd come by this front gate and you'd see cars up here. Maybe Elvis was home, but you didn't know. You didn't know the day to day. So I've always been interested in how smart Colonel was in making sure that there was just enough Elvis out there to keep people hungry for.
Exactly.
And Colonel was in that world where those guys were all still alive that had handled Gregory Peck and the big movie stars from the MGM days. And he was around a lot of the old-timers that had made movies, and they never let the stars out walk into a coffee shop. And Elvis was really caught up into that early part of it. It wasn't all his idea. He was probably way more willing to go out and hang around in the streets and go to the clubs than they wouldn't. Got him Harry Jenkins, a couple of guys. They gave advice like they were talking to Gary Cooper.
Right.
Stay out of the public. Make them buy your tickets.
Guys, I want to thank you so much for being here with us on Gates of Graceland, and no better place to have a conversation about the life and career of Elvis Presley than right here inside of Graceland.
His living room.
And thank you for coming back here and sharing your thoughts on Elvis and Colonel Parker. And I know all of us appreciate the time that you spent, those amazing years that you spent on the road, you know, out there every night, you know, venue after venue. We really appreciate it for all that you did. Everybody, I'm Tom Brown. Thanks for joining us here on Gates of Graceland. We'll be back soon with another exciting edition. Right now, we're going to head off to Palm Springs on the jet. What about it, huh?
All right. All right.